Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, I will be talking to you about the PSO case study, which is focused on the bullwhip effect, and this is a follow-up to our lecture on the bullwhip effect. The reason for this particular to introduce you to this particular case study is for you to see the bullwhip effect being played out in the real world. All right, to start off with, I'd like to give you a brief overview of a company by the name of PSO, which is also known as Pakistan State Oil. And PSO has 67% market share in the petrol market of Pakistan, which is quite substantial. So more than half of the petrol of the country, they are in charge of. And so in terms of import and distribution, they're a very big player. One thing, this case study is dated to January 2015. And at that particular time, the company was facing certain debt and management issues. One thing to note over here is that PSO is a state slash government owned company. And though they had some very senior people on the top management level, the company unfortunately was struggling with circular debt. Um, and so this was something that, and management problems. So they did have some systemic problems within the organization. One other thing that the company at that time was not doing was business continuity planning or disaster management planning. And by what I mean by that is that they did not have plans in place of what their actions will be in case there is any sort of disruption or problem in their operations. So many large firms across the world, internationally, actually invest significantly in business continuity planning and in disaster recovery management. And they actually make plans. Every department usually makes plans that look, if there is some sort of a operational problem, what is going to be our strategy? How do we overcome any shortfalls that may occur? So they did not really believe in having these plans in place at that particular time. Around, again, circa January 2015, around that time, a couple of things to keep in mind regarding the petroleum industry in general was that petrol was being sold in cash. At that time, gas was in short supply. So many times, an alternative to petrol is liquefied petroleum gas, LNG, many times it's known as, or, if you're at home and there is a heater, that uses a lot of electricity and petrol, and it's really cold. So sometimes people are able to switch over to a gas heater, which is cheaper. But in around January 2015, it's important to note for the sake of the case study that there was a gas shortage in Pakistan. In general, the consumption of petrol was about 4 million tons. Let me just start, diving right into the case study and the story. So the story is that, in January 2015, it was a particularly cold winter. It was very, very cold. And in Upper Punjab, the temperatures really dropped very low. And because of this, and as I mentioned, just a little while ago, there was, not a lot of gas, there was gas shortage. So what happened is there was a spike in the demand for petrol, and a lot of people, because they needed heaters to survive, they needed, to keep themselves warm, decided to use more petrol, ended up using a lot more petrol. Now, what happened is that because of this sudden increase, so there was a sudden increase in demand, which was different from what was the usual demand. What happened is that PSO, rumors started that there's a shortage of petrol that's stemming from PSO. And these rumors started spreading all around. Soon media heard about this, like, oh wow, it seems like there's going to be a shortage of petrol. And since PSO is the main, has the big chunk of the market share, that effectively would mean that there would be a petrol shortage throughout the country. So now, because of these rumors, you know, everybody, you know, the media turned to the government, and the government just kind of kept quiet about, you know, what was going on. They really didn't want to say a lot. They knew that, look, PSO has some systemic management issues and, you know, circular debt issues, and they were kind of just hoping that they were just hoping to ride the wave, and that, you know, this entire situation would just get resolved. The government basically said that, look, everyone, there is some sort of perhaps a shortage, but just wait it out, and soon there's going to be a petrol shipment that's going to come, and everything will be fine. Now, one would think that because there's a shortage in specifically PSO, the other oil manufacturing companies would, you know, increase their supply and get more shipments. But those other oil manufacturing companies did not do that. They continue to just order as much as they were usually ordering in the past. So the net result was this, and this is a very unfortunate situation. It's at one of the PSO, you know, petrol pumps around January 2015, and what you see in this image over here is that there are people just lining up to get petrol, and they're effectively hoarding, and they're just, you know, wanting to make sure that they have enough uh, petrol and some extra, so that in case there was a petrol shortage, that they could still get around town and, you know, just operate and function. And also they probably needed it for their heaters, and so it was, remember, very very cold, unbearable kind of winters. And so, and there was this sudden, you know, again, spike in demand. Everybody started hoarding, and when the hoarding starts, it sort of just, you know, it spreads, and so everybody starts hoarding. And what effectively happens, unfortunately, is that when there is hoarding, then the bullwhip effect starts playing out. And what happens is that all the entities across the supply chain start increasing their inventory levels. So just in the previous lecture, we studied about the bullwhip effect, and we learned that, look, the bullwhip effect happens when there is a shift in customer demand, and this is magnified, you know, the further you move up the supply chain, and this leads to large fluctuations in inventory. And we kind of saw this also in this graphic, where the customer started changing its demand, but then as this, you know, you move along the supply chain downwards, you see that the swings in inventory increase a lot more. And so eventually the amount of shipment for petrol is going to be a humongous amount, because, you know, as you go down the supply chain, this sudden shift in the customer demand is actually magnified by virtue of everybody maintaining extra inventory across the supply chain, in case this hoarding continues over a longer period of time. Now, this, as we discussed in the previous lecture, and you can go back to that lecture if you'd like, just to understand it better, but it leads to a lot of disadvantages pretty much for everybody across the supply chain. And I'll repeat exactly, you know, why. Because what happens is that people get stuck with a lot of inventory. And when things go back to normal, they are stuck with that inventory for a very long period of time. And inventory means that their money is effectively stuck, and that's not a good situation for anyone. If you'd like to learn, if you'd like to get more into details about the bullwhip effect and its negative repercussions across the supply chain, you can refer back to the previous lecture. So at this point, usually when we, you know, I teach the case study live, we have an interactive session, and we really discuss as to, you know, what was the root cause of this fiasco, and was it avoidable? Could the situation have actually been resolved? And what was the long-term and short-term impact of this crisis that happened? not only within PSO, but also for the country. And if we really, as usually our discussion evolves within in the class, we usually, end up coming to the same kind of conclusions, which is that, look, I mean, yes, it was winter, there was a sudden increase in demand, but the issue was that there was not enough of a safety stock or a buffer stock, meaning that PSO didn't have enough reserve oil or petrol, so that they could release in case of a sudden spike in demand. And that's something that most companies should plan for. They need to have some sort of buffer inventory. Also, we saw, over here we're seeing, the bullwhip effect. And again, I would really sincerely suggest that you go back and you see what were all the measures that they could have taken in order to really stop the bullwhip effect from happening. And those measures were not really being were not taking place. Also, the media created a lot of panic, and that was poor leadership. One of the things that is important is crisis management. And so, in crisis management, when there is some sort of a crisis that the company is going through, you have experts or very senior people that craft messages which give the right information, and it's crafted in a way that it's said in the right way to avert any sort of panic. So if the situation had been addressed, through very strong leadership, right, and nipped at the bud, then this entire panic would not have spread the way that it really spread. Now, what happened is that the fuel inventory really went down to very dangerous levels because of all of this entire crisis. And so usually they had, where PSO used to keep a reserve for 20 days of petrol, it went down all the way to 8 days. Now, just imagine if this situation continued and it came down to zero, that would effectively have meant that there was no petrol in that PSO was being able to offer. And so that would have really brought the country to its knees, and that would have been extremely dangerous, because if a country runs out of petrol or has really low levels, then the entire transportation system comes to a standstill, and there's not much of activity, financial activity, that can happen. This also can have a very serious reputational repercussions. So the country's reputation could seriously be harmed, and it also poses some security risks, because if you run out of petrol, then again the country is pretty much crippled, and that could be it's basically making the country extremely vulnerable. Now, the crisis went up to a point of hoarding and panic and all kinds of craziness over a period of time. It wasn't that the rumor came out all of a sudden there was a panic. It didn't happen. It happened over a period of time. And if during this period of time correct and swift changes in demand planning were made, swift changes were made in ordering the amount that was needed, then again, this crisis could have been, you know, avoided to a certain degree. There were also, circular debt issues, and circular debt is something that a lot of state-owned enterprises basically face. And what happens in circular debt is that it's basically that you keep on taking debt, and so the other people are waiting for your payment of debt, and they're also in debt, and so it's like a chain. So everybody in the chain has taken debt from each other, and because one person is not being able to pay the next party, the debt cycle keeps getting worse. And this is something that I'm not going to get into the details. You can definitely read it up. There's a lot of literature available online on circular debt management. But long story short, the company had systemic management and circular debt issues, and those issues were just kind of pending. They weren't being actively resolved. And when you don't actively resolve issues, you again put yourself in a very vulnerable situation, because if a crisis does hit, then you're even in an even weaker position. So you want to make sure that if a company is especially a company that has 67% of petrol is sort of governing 67% of petrol. If it's running into issues, that those issues are immediately resolved, and that they're not just, they don't just keep on continuing for a long period of time. So, what happened is also, because of all of this entire situation, PSO, and as the crisis continued to worsen, ended up having to go out to the market and taking out LCs, which is basically letters of credit, and basically taking, they ended up having to pay a lot more for the petrol than they would have if they had done correct planning, so correct demand planning, which they had not really done. And so all parties, obviously the parties that they were buying from, they were buying at a higher price, and also the intermediaries such as the banks benefited. And again, there were certain questions as to, why did this sort of level, why did the mismanagement, why was it allowed to happen? Why wasn't this crisis managed a lot better? So the question is, what could PSO have really done to mitigate, this kind of a crisis and these kind of risks? So just to repeat, and some of these points have already gone through, but I will repeat them again. One of the things that they could have done was build better buffer stocks, so keep some extra inventory. Also, make sure that, if you have any financial problems, make it very clearly aware to all the stakeholders involved and work towards resolving them as soon as possible. Another thing that they could have really done was to make arrangements with petrol suppliers at pre-negotiated rates for demand fluctuations. So this was a very smart solution that they could have done, and which basically means is that, look, I speak to my supplier and I say, look, in case there is some sort of an increase in demand all of a sudden, can we just decide a rate that you'll give me the petrol at? Because sometimes, it happens, like there's a sudden increase or a spike in demand. And if I had pre-negotiated rates ready with my suppliers, then when such a situation happened, I wouldn't have to buy it at like these ridiculous prices, right? So it's very important to sort of do this kind of planning well in advance. And this is, again, it falls into the whole business continuity planning. How will you continue your business even if they're in case of a crisis? One important lesson to also learn is that you should not stay quiet in a crisis. No organization should just, that's not good leadership. Just keeping quiet. If there's a problem, then you need to get up and you need to deal with that problem in the right way. Keeping quiet 99.99% of times just makes the situation get worse. And if you need communication experts, you bring them on board, but regardless, avoiding a situation, not talking about it, just keeping quiet about it, that makes things worse. Some other things that PSO could have done was they could have coordinated with other oil manufacturing companies, which is basically speaking to the other competitors or parties in the market, and basically letting them know that, look, sometimes, it may just happen that we run into issues. Well, if that ever happens, can we make an agreement that maybe we can work together collaboratively and collaborate, and maybe you can increase your demand levels and import more oil during that period of time. And so, you may have competitors, but it's always good to have good terms with even your competitors, so that in times of crisis, everybody can work together and resolve the crisis in the best way possible. Above all, perhaps one of the key things to do is, for any company, is to invest in disaster management, crisis management, and business continuity. And basically, this means that you make plans, you think in advance of what are all the things that could go wrong. And if they do go wrong, what is our strategy going to be? Do we have certain solutions that we can use? Do we have certain, can we plan ahead? Can we take some proactive action so that if there is some sort of a crisis that develops, we are in a very good situation to avert and overcome that crisis? And that basically happens with, that's when, that's strong leadership, being able to do that. um, this entire situation, this entire crisis basically led to a significant financial loss for Pakistan. I mean, since this was a government-owned company, when the government-owned company goes through a loss, effectively it's it's hurting um, the country's um, finances. So there was, there were financial losses, and above, and then also I think it brought to in light, poor leadership and risk management. And this basically could have, if the situation had gotten a lot worse, could have really shattered the confidence and reputation of the country overall. So this is something that, thank goodness that it didn't get a lot worse. But if the spike in demand had been, let's say, instead of 18%, 40% or 50%, then you would have seen, a complete disaster situation happening. Um, one thing I do want to mention here is that after all of this happened, there was a change in the management of PSO, and there were several changes since then. But this is, a real life case study that I thought I would bring to light because it actually reflects the bullwhip effect in a real case situation. There are certain leadership challenges that are very specific to Pakistan, including safety and security, people development, product quality, customer service, governance issues, supply chain knowledge, and investment in long term. But the thing is that, yes, there are challenges. Every country has its own challenges, every company has its own challenges. But if you plan ahead and you know supply chain management very well, and you know that there is such a thing as the bullwhip effect, and you know that you should be planning in case something like this happens, then that's where, that can determine the success or failure of a company. And so on that note, I'm going to bring this lecture to an end. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and you got to see the application of the bullwhip effect in a real case situation. Thank you very much.